Thank you very much. So, dear all, good afternoon. It's a great honor to be again with you. Now I'm going to talk about the NICSP 22, as our dear Sergio referred to, which refers to the disclosure of financial information on the general government sector. It is important to indicate that this is a NICSP 22. It is an exclusive standard of the government sector. When I refer to an exclusive standard, what I want to say is that it is not an equivalent standard for NIC, IFRS, SME. Those are standards that are exclusively for the governmental sector.
That refer to information for those jurisdictions that decide to present information about the government sector. And as we saw yesterday with NICSP in financial statements, according to the public sector. In this case, it only refers about the disclosure of financial information related to the government sector. And this refers to reconciliation between government sector and information of consolidated financial statements that are going to be presented based on NICSP, specifically number 35 that Sergio mentioned. Therefore, which is the purpose of this standard? It is to establish disclosure requirements for the governments that choose to present this information, as it is optional, on the general government sector in their consolidated financial statements. And what's the scope of these standards? Any government that chooses to apply the requirements of this regulation, if they choose to present financial statements on the accumulation or accrual accounting base, and disclosing information about the general government sector. Usually, financial statements are consolidated or gather only controlled entities. The government sector or entities that are part of the general government sector are ruled over information, statistical financial information. We will see this later on. Some jurisdictions, for example, national government, control regional government entities at state and even local level. Therefore, this is consolidated from the governmental levels, including these jurisdictions. But in some other cases, it is not the situation. So according to financial information statistical basis, the government sector is combined. It is possible that some jurisdictions will include entities that are not consolidated in their financial statements. That's very important. This standard disaggregates consolidated financial statements of a government. And as I said, this is kind of a reconciliation between the government sector and consolidated state according to the rules or laws. Let's continue. Now, how the government or general government sector is constituted. The national account system of 1993, prepared by the UN and other organizations, defines that the government sector is made up by regional, central, and local governments due to social security funds for each government, and non-profit institutions which are controlled by these government units. And this is according to the National Account Systems of 1993 issued by the United Nations. Financial information statistical bases seek to provide financial information on the general government sector. Financial information statistical bases basically are made up by non-profit organization with no commercial activities that depend on budget, and they provide information on government entities that carry out mainly trading activities, which are financial corporation sectors, public, financial, and non-financial corporations, and the public sector as a group, as a set, as we can see here in the slide. Those non-profit entities, the ESAL, can be non-market entities with budgetary allocations. And we have also trading companies, commercial companies, financial and non-financial. Now, if we compare financial information statistics against NICSP, the general government sector takes into account for composition financial information statistical basis, which want to show the analysis of the fiscal policy, how it has been made, and how governments have achieved their goal of fiscal policies, and the general government yield, and also the public government sector. And basically the NICSP goals is that they look for information and also accountability. This is basically what these NICSP look for. Then So, what's the general government sector according to NICSP 22? It includes all government organization entities defined in the financial information statistical basis. Hold on a second, I have some technical issues. Well, then, financial information statistical basis seek the preparation of information, and we need a reconciliation of all this information as we had mentioned before. Sorry for this technical problem. A double slide. So, government sector and public sector. Composition. According to financial information statistical basis, the public sector includes the general government sector, public financial corporations, and non-financial public corporations. According to the National Account System of 1993, this includes all entities that are part of the central government, regional and local, and also social security funds and non-profit institution, no market, controlled by the entities that we previously mentioned. Now, public financial corporations include those corporations and also quasi-corporation, that's an interesting name, and non-profit institutions that carry out financial intermediation or provide financial services for the market, among them financial public corporations that are controlled by the government, central banks, of course, and other financial institutions that operate on market conditions. Public non-financial corporations include non-financial corporations according to the previous definition, controlled by resident governments, quasi-corporation, and non-profit corporations for the market. Those are public service corporations of the public sector that trade goods and services. This is self-explanatory. Non-banking entities that are not devoted to financial intermediation. Well, according to statistical basis of financial information, a corporation, just to define these entities that make up the general and public sector, corporations are created to produce goods and services for the market. This is the definition of corporations according to financial information statistics. A quasi-corporation, it is a company which is not legally incorporated but works as a corporation. This is really very complex, and I see this as de facto societies, or not societies, but corporations. Those are de facto corporations. Some governments use these figures. And a non-profit entity, and I made the acronym as ESAL because they seem to have the same weight. These are legal entities that produce goods and services but without financial profits. So this is the definition of corporation, quasi-corporation, and a non-profit entity. Accounting policies then. The financial information on the government sector is going to be disclosed according to reported guidelines according to the NICP 35, and it is like this. If we apply NICSP 35 to the financial sector, financial public corporations, and public non-financial corporation, and we can see whether the general sector is not recognizing this sector but as an asset, and then it is recorded as net assets of participant entities. The difference is quite important. They are not consolidated, but they are presenting the financial statements, and they will present the statements as different assets, other assets. According NICSP 22, this can be done optional. They decide to disclose general government sector, so they need to disaggregate to present the federal government as a government sector which is reporting. This is going to be the consolidated entity, and that's what we know from SMEs. So those that make up the general government will be according with NICSP 35. Let's continue. So, which is the information to be disclosed based on NICSP 22? So, assets with their major classes, indicating investment in other sectors which are financial and non-financial public corporations, as I mentioned before, and also the major classes of liabilities, net assets, patrimony, increases and decreases of reappraisal and other revenue items, and also the equivalent to ORIs, expenses, results, savings, non-savings, and cash flows according to the major classes: investment, financing, as our dear Sergio mentioned when he was talking about the NICSP number 2. As we previously mentioned, the NICSP 1 indicates the full set of financial statements. This based on accruals accumulated basis. That's what I mean. Then standard 22 is related with the main categories, liability and expenditure related to the financial statement. NICSPs are not setting for how to make these disclosures. They do not indicate how to make disclosures. So you can choose to use notes or separate rows or columns, or as the jurisdiction may deem convenient. So when you have financial information of the general government, they're going to disclose significant controlled entities, and any change along with some explanation about the reasons of those that were included and they are not now included in the general government sector, SGG in Spanish. Reconciliation of financial statements and NICSP 22 considers that general government reconciliation complies with accountability, showing the relationship of each general government item with the total amount of this item for the government. Therefore, disclosed information in the general government sector needs to be reconciliated with consolidated financial statements of the government and showing in a separate manner each item of the financial statements. We're going to show later on a very quick example of this area. And then NICSP 22 requires these results to be reconciled with financial statements. And then they will present in a separate manner adjustments of investments of other assets of those sectors that we mentioned, financial and non-financial corporations. And they are going to be presented as other investments. Additionally, entities may disclose information on the amount of adjustment for each item related to these two sectors that we have been talking about. Okay, we continue. We are going to try to explain this complex topic of the general government. We're not so used. Those in the private sector were not very used to see these kind of things and to carry out this reconciliation. And according to what we're going to see, yes, were you saying something? I think that there was an open microphone by accident. Sorry, I thought it was a question. So look at these note disclosures and also a reconciliation. Disclosed information. This refers to general government, and this is in policies notes. Those are the presentation basis. Accounting policies are reflected, with the exception of some variations of financial public corporations. According to NICSP 22, general government, these corporations, financial and non-financial public corporations are not reconciled in the general government, but they are acknowledged in a different item of the participating entity. The general government includes these ministries, central government, and other government-controlled entities involved in non-market activities, and they are detailed. And the activities related to post services, look at this disclosure, that are included in the communications ministry have been included according to these criteria, and they are included in the general government as we previously mentioned. We need to indicate which entities were not included in the government sector as duly noted. We will see how the standard suggests to make this disaggregation to come from the general government to consolidated financial statements according to NICSP. For example, this one is an example based on the government assets. Then we have this column where we are going to reconcile financial, non-financial public corporation, and then the removals that we indicated that should be made in the general government sector items, and also the total of the consolidated government. So we have assets with all the categories. Current asset, equivalent, accounts receivable, inventories, anticipations, other current activities. Very similar, as we can see, to what we know in NICPs for those trading companies. We can see here continuing accounts receivable, investments, and I highlighted this line, other sector investments, and they are with no balance. They are reclassified. They were other sector investments, and here they are without balance because they were consolidated. They were segregated in all the item. And other categories of the financial statement. And the same is done with liabilities. This is a segregation as such, line by line of each item. All liabilities, patrimony, with all the eliminations or removals. Also, in the P&L, as we previously indicated, they are segregated by activity, taxes, penalties, fines, other sector revenue, other government transfers, other income, by category as we previously indicated. Then expenditure by function, general, defense, public works, environmental protection, housing, education, etc. At the bottom, we can see savings, non-savings, as we said, and with this very short introduction, because this is going to take some time to read it with a lot of care. And I am here to answer any question that you may pose. Thank you very much for your attention.